What was I saying about the Mandalorian? What can I say?
Okay. I want to make
if you've have something I want to put on the table.
If you've said everything you wanted to say about the Mandalorian.
No. Solo story. Okay, I've heard some people talking about this, and
that's
when I saw
putting your boots on the table. That's rude as hell.
with mud and crap, horse shit all over them. Okay.
Mariah, I know you've been thinking about the Mandalorian.
Every moment of the day.
Yes, and everyone's been thinking about the Mandalorian.
Well, when they're not doing life stuff.
I think a lot of people just drive around thinking about the Mandalorian. So even while they're doing life stuff, I think people are thinking about the Mandalorian. Don't discount.
And oddly, I don't think Pedro Pascal is thinking about it at all.
Well, people certainly aren't thinking about him because they don't know who he is.
Well,
Do you remember X-Men? And there was discussion around James Marsden because his eyes are covered for most of X-Men because he plays Cyclops.
I think they needed to be covered,
but
though.
But what people pointed out was that eyes are the window to the soul. They're, the most expressive feature when acting. And if an actor isn't allowed their eyes, then it's more difficult to make that connection with the performance. But Pedro Pascal has...
Jordy did it.
Pedro Pascal has even less than...
Well, also, he wasn't always
Cyclops.
The person in the suit, so...
That's a point I was going to make. Why do they need a name actor? Why can't it just be a stunt man and then have a voiceover guy do the voice?
Well, because you haven't seen it, so I don't want to reveal spoilers.
I've seen 3 of the episodes.
Yes, but you haven't seen the entire thing.
So does he ever show his face?
Do you want to know, and do we say spoilers? I think we've already blown it, though.
Can Pedro Pascal prove to his family that he appeared in this show?
Yes.
Okay.
He can definitely do that. A very sweaty, sickly looking, but definitely Pedro Pascal. He's you do get one money shot in the very end. And then there is one more thing that I'm not going to spoil.
So
that we mentioned before.
If he went into central casting and they said, "What have you been in?" He says, "The Mandalorian," and they were like, "Prove it." He could prove it.
Yes, that does happen, and I think that it is so.
I still don't think James Marsden can prove he was in X-Men, though.
But the thing with James Marsden is, I think that when his eyes are uncovered, he looks so soulless that it's better if they are covered, because then you can kind of guess that there's a soul.
Was it necessary to deploy...
He looks like a male cheerleader.
Was it necessary to deploy that kidney shot against James Marsden? That low blow?
But it's true.
What if he
has these sort of
What if he's one of the first industry people who finds our podcast, and he was really enjoying it up until that point? That's probably the last thing in the world he was expecting.
I'd feel bad, but...
You are soulless. You look like a male cheerleader. I don't think a male... I think you just say cheerleader. It's not male or female.
No,
George W. Bush was a cheerleader, and they don't say he was a male cheerleader.
Yeah, there's like a George W. Bushness there, that there's just something missing from his gaze. It's a little superficial, and it's better when his eyes are covered.
Don't do this. Leave James Marsden alone.
Again, I was going to mention Jordy.
You were beautiful, James.
LeVar Burton has
You gave beautiful performances in the other stuff you were in outside of X-Men.
But
help.
I can't. I
what
just
else
remember. I remember seeing him briefly in some teen movies, and it's just. I mean, maybe I'm judging harshly because he was so young.
What was that?
And the nature of the films, but...
What was that? Was he in that film with... what's the name of the actor that played Bane? The English actor.
God. The one that gave...
The one that
that gave what's his
that
name
would
such a
pay
hard
any amount of money in the
time.
world to delete his MySpace profile from internet history, but can't.
Tom Hardy.
Remember that romantic comedy where it was like two guys and they were at war?
And he gave the Ain't It Cool News. That's what I was trying to reference. Moriarty. He gave Moriarty such a hard time in in an interview.
Well, that's a sidecar.
Yeah, but that's who I was referencing.
But you know the film I'm talking about. It's like these two guys are competing for the love of a woman, and it's like I think war was in the title. It was sort of like a high concept romantic comedy. Was James Marsden the other guy? I don't even remember who the actress was.
I don't remember the movie.
It was that forgettable. And now I'm embarrassed that I remembered it.
Don't be. It's just I just don't remember.
I never saw it, but I remember these trailers for it that they played quite often.
I just remember seeing Marsden in some.
It reminded me for some reason
just
of
little bits and pieces of teen
The
movies that were
Weatherman,
very
Nicolas Cage, just the high concept comedy. Like I just thought, oh, that's not going to work, and it didn't.
I don't know where we're going, but
Oh
I was
God,
I
this
was
is
going
like
to say
this is like someone said. A girl is trapped in the barn and needs help, and we ran into the forest. So it's like now we're just like twice as far away from the barn. We don't know how to get out of the forest back to the barn.
Okay, let a blind man lead the blind. I really do believe LeVar Burton is a good example of an actor having his eyes covered and emoting through the device. He really had so much personality.
You can tell exactly how old someone is by how they refer to LeVar Burton. They call him Geordie. If they call him the Reading Rainbow guy,
Geordie?
If they call him the Roots guy, that means, oh, you're really old. If he's the Roots guy.
But can you know of Roots to know of his?
Well, we know of Roots, but as far as I know, you haven't seen it.
No, I haven't.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it, but I know that was something he did.
He was Kunta Kinte. He was the lead character in Roots, and that was where he rose. I don't know if he rose to prominence there, but he was prominently in the film or in the miniseries.
Those 70s miniseries, they were very interesting.
That was truly the root of his acting career.
Okay, anyway. But
Pedro Pascal has, for most of The Mandalorian, he has a very hard job. And like you just said, sometimes it's not even him.
I don't know, because I think that he is such a fine actor, an actor's actor, that he... it's not... What he's doing isn't difficult for him.
If he's such a fine actor, why did he agree to appear in The Mandalorian? Wouldn't he use his time acting, actually acting in something else?
Why would he agree to be in The Great Wall with Matt Damon? But apparently he was. I've never seen it. But
so maybe he's a fine actor, but he has horrible taste.
Yes. That's a possibility. And the fact that The
Mandalorian horrible taste.
No, but it's not. I mean, I think that it could have been very bad because it was a Star Wars movie and it was a spin-off. I mean, Rogue One was great, but that was the one shining moment.
Someone might very uncharitably say that The Mandalorian is cape shit, which is like a derogatory term for anything to do with comic books or fantasy, but it's really well done.
I thought you were like talking about Cape Fear and saying somebody thinks Cape Fear is not a very good film.
Which version?
The De Niro version.
Well, I think they're both considered to be good films.
I think I think that's a very good film.
Do you realize that the De Niro version was a remake of a film starring Gregory Peck in the same part?
No, I didn't know that, but I can see Gregory Peck doing that. But Pedro Pascal, to stay on topic, is
you can see Gregory Peck being like a rapey guy terrorizing a family.
Yes,
I can easily see that.
Okay, you're dragging me back into the forest, but he does have that rapey vibe.
We should rename the podcast The Forest.
Okay, I'm saying that. I love To Kill a Mockingbird, but Gregory Peck has a very manicuty, rapey sort of just like you feel like he could turn his emotions off the way they do in the Vampire Diaries.
Okay,
there's a really bad reference.
I'm going to drop a knowledge bomb on you about Gregory Peck. You know Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd? Do you know that was a remake of a much older film starring Gregory Peck?
Man.
It was called The £1 Million Note, and it's about an American, I think, seaman. He worked on a boat, and he gets he goes offshore in England, but he's absolutely penniless. And two old rich guys, just like Trading Places, have this scheme to turn a very poor, destitute, but honest man's life around. They pick Gregory Peck, and they hand him this £1 million note. And the first thing he does with the £1 million note is go into a public house and orders steak and eggs. And when he finished...
That's what I'm talking about.
And a tankard of ale.
That
and when
voice!
When he completes the tankard of ale
wait.
and the plate, he asks for the same thing again because he looks at his check and he says, well, I'm rich. I'll have the same thing twice. That literally happens in the film.
Wait, before you go forward, I have to say, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I was also talking about his general mannerisms, but also the way that he talks. It's very Christian Bale and American Psycho.
I think it was a thing back then.
That very precise
Huston,
enunciation.
John Huston also had a distinctive, deep voice.
This transatlantic, but very slow, deep, very sharply pronounced way of speaking. And
I think it's affected. I think if
it feels affected.
I think if those men were born and raised in a different era, they wouldn't sound like that.
It's too practiced. It feels practiced.
Like
it's
Katharine
not
Hepburn,
natural.
I think, did a female version of that.
There's something very uncomfortable,
very over the top,
and the discomfort that it creates. It leaches all the warmness out of their entire being, and suddenly they seem like somebody who is not very connected with their feelings.
So, are you sending?
They have no empathy.
As far as careers and people you're shamelessly kicking around, have you just sent Gregory Peck to the penalty box with James Marsden?
Well, he's not alive anymore to share it.
Are they giving each other comfort?
No, this is like that
James Marsden is very alive.
No, this
He's
is like
crying right now.
Do you remember Stardust? This is like in Stardust where all the ghosts of the dead princes.
No, Mariah. I don't remember Stardust.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go forward with this. All the princes, they die, and until one of them is chosen to be the next king, they all have to remain on Earth as ghosts. And
this sounds like a shitty Squaresoft game.
Okay, Gregory Peck, he's in that penalty box, but as a ghost.
He's in Stardust? No. Well, I was thinking, isn't Stardust something more recent? Was that, or is this the one that stars Michelle Pfeiffer?
Yes.
Okay, then Gregory Peck definitely was not in that because I don't think he made it out of the 80s.
No. But,
was he the actor in Rocket Gibraltar?
Oh God, I don't think so.
Or am I confusing him with another older actor?
I think so. I can't remember that film.
Who was in Rocket Gibraltar?
Macaulay Culkin.
God, it's just like Uncle Buck all over again. All we can remember is Macaulay Culkin.
Well, he was everywhere, and he's very memorable. God, I know. Oh, Kevin Spacey. Can we talk about him anymore?
Kevin Spacey was in Stardust?
Yes, he was like the funny uncle.
Wow.
Foreshadowing.
All I'll say is Kevin Spacey is a great actor.
He is.
He's fantastic, and I'm going to miss seeing him in new movies. He specialized in playing a kind of character that I can't see many other actors playing. The kind of charismatic, almost sociopathically charismatic salesman.
I think he was a bit sociopathic.
And he leveraged that perfectly and beautifully into the parts.
I'm probably going to reference it a lot because it was a book that really affected me. And it's so ridiculous to say this book affected me.
Let's stop talking about it because I'm getting uncomfortable.
No,
Isn't this like a young adult, cringy teen novel?
No, the Film Diaries of Richard E. Grant. And
I thought you were going to mention the source material for Stardust. And that deeply affected you.
No. But the Film Diaries of Richard E. Grant, I used to really love that book.
So you carry them around with you like certain suspicious people in the 60s carried around the Communist Manifesto.
No, I just read it one summer. I mean, not the whole summer, but I was enamored with it for a while. Don't go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, Mariah. You're not going to make it with anyone anyhow. But... yeah, Richard E. Grant dished on a lot of people. I think he was the original spill the tea dude, and nobody knew it because nobody really cared to pick up his film diaries. But those who did, there were some really unique stories in there. And he mentioned, I remember, Kevin Spacey several times, and what he was like off camera, and he seemed incredibly thirsty. He would sort of push the same impressions on people all the time, everywhere he went, and he just seemed so focused on fame. Not in a I want to get famous way, but like a sort of a ruthless way, to the point where he couldn't have normal conversations with other people that didn't involve him trying to sell himself. And that feels a little sociopathic, a little narcissistic, just not connecting with people. Just look
Speaking
at this,
of
accept this.
sociopathic narcissist, I do remember an anecdote from that book that you told me. He was at a party with Madonna, and she was just staring
That's
behind.
not even funny, because
Okay, what
that's
was the
just
story?
what everybody thinks.
She was just sitting there with her arms crossed.
No, he became friends with a friend of Madonna's. What's her name?
Sandra Bernhard.
Yeah, Sandra Bernhardt.
And they
Because
visited.
from the very, very
This was in
ridiculous the film. What was it called? I should know
Desperately
this.
Seeking Susan.
No.
Hudson Hawk.
Hudson Hawk. Yes, Hudson Hawk. That ridiculous film, and they became friends on it, playing the villains, and she dragged him to some party at Madonna's house.
Didn't you say this was Dennis Rodman's house in San Antonio when he was playing for the Spurs?
I have no idea.
I thought that was a part
clearly.
of the story.
I don't. If you remember it, then it's probably true, but I don't remember.
But keep going, because it's funny.
The only thing I remember is that she wasn't really talking to anyone. She was just staring at her reflection in the mirror behind them.
No, but it built up to that. He just
wall.
said, she just kept staring behind me, and it went on and on and on. And then I finally, when I got up and looked around me, it was a mirror, so I realized she was just sitting there looking at herself.
It was a solid anecdote. But I almost think that's
but you have Madonna in your mind, and that's hilarious. And I think it was worth telling.
I think it's the least interesting anecdote from the book because it is so basic.
It was the only one I can remember.
That's
all
not
true.
The stuff. I read the I read the biographies of a couple of
I think you said I remember. Here's another anecdote. I remember Anthony Hopkins on the set of Bram Stoker's Dracula just went to Richard E. Grant and said, "Get in the car. I want to drive."
Yes.
And then they just drove into the night.
That whole segment is amazing, and I've heard other tales from the set of that film in other books, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was a great film, but it's also very, to me, interesting because it gathered all of these bizarre characters together on a ranch.
Larger than life characters.
And they basically were at summer camp together at what's his name's house. I can't think. Coppola.
I think it's like something
Coppola.
we always wanted to do. We had this fantasy about getting a big, almost ranch-style compound, and then just inviting our artists.
Apparently, it was not. It was his fantasy as well.
But people have done this before. Like you hear people talk
communes
about
of
communes,
artists.
and what's the very famous one, Tanglewood. You hear about Leonard Bernstein writing music at Tanglewood, and I think John Williams has been at Tanglewood.
And think about oh God, I can't think of anybody right now.
Well, we're recording, so this is the right time to think about people. Hello, Dean Martin. Yes.
No. The Mabel Dodge Lewin house in New Mexico, which was once owned by Dennis Hopper for a while.
Was it once owned by Mabel Dodge?
Yes.
Did she leave it to Dennis Hopper?
No, I don't know how that happened, but I know for a while Dennis Hopper owned it.
And I think part of the movie Twins was filmed, which is really the biggest feather in its cap. The Mabel Dodge Lewin house. And
D.H. Lawrence stayed there, and
well, that's beneath the Twins, in the hierarchy of impressive events that happen there. Twins has to be on top. I'm really driving that one home.
What were we talking about? The Mandalorian.
This is the most interesting discussion about The Mandalorian that anyone's ever had, and unique discussion. I promise you, Mariah, out of all of the YouTube uploads about The Mandalorian, none of them has the shape of this one.
Okay, well, we should come back to the Francis Ford Coppola, Bram Stoker Dracula segment, but
why don't you just have a separate channel and do an ASMR reading of the of that book in very low tones?
Maybe. But The Mandalorian, you mentioned to me earlier that Disney Plus seems to have an issue with people.
Yes, I'd read online
subscribing.
that people are opening a subscription to Disney Plus, binge watching The Mandalorian, and canceling the fucking subscription. And this is a major problem for Disney Plus.
Well, that's because everything else on Disney Plus is for children. And The Mandalorian, it's not for children. It's
and
necessarily
for adults who like Disney cartoons, of which we've met a few in our life, in our travels.
Maybe. I just think, there are people who are subscribing for the cartoons.
Are you saying the Jussie Smollett classic, The Mighty Ducks, doesn't transcend the interest of all ages? Yes, he was in that. He was one of the children. Fact.
I'm saying
It's
that...
the first time you heard that, isn't it?
Yes.
It's true.
And I knew there was something coming, but I think that there are people who want to watch Disney films, and they're usually people who have children. And then The Mandalorian is just something else. It's an adult film that is not R-rated, and I think that's something that people want right now.
And if I remember when we talked about this earlier, you pointed out that, I pointed out that the people who want to see the cartoons all the time already own them.
Yes. Well, no, I think that there's some convenience in being able to just log on and watch whatever you want and not have all these DVDs.
Well, for example, you own, I think, every season of Buffy on DVD, but that versus streaming it, you'd prefer streaming it because it's easier.
Yeah, because sometimes I want to put it on when I'm just doing something, and I want to be in that mood.
Okay, we were talking about The Mandalorian, and I've had some... at your behest, since I know you and other people have been so excited about it, I sat down and really got to thinking about it, and then my thoughts led me to Star Wars in general and the state of Star Wars, and why people are so generally unhappy with the sequel trilogy, and why they're happy with The Mandalorian. And because I was going to talk about this earlier when I talked about Luke. And when I ask you to look at Lucas in the 70s, here's why. Look at Lucas in the 70s. He has these big ideas about space. He has big ideas about these outlandish aliens, these space slugs, people fighting with lightsabers, light swords. So these are going to be some big ideas that are pretty difficult for people to digest. They're so out there. So what do you do when you have that?
What do you do to not make it be Tron?
You get a big, robust...
Condolences to whoever loves Tron. I know it's got a fan base.
Okay, so it's like hanging a heavy tapestry. You need a big, heavy frame. And what was his frame? He went back to classical mythology, time-tested stories with really big, easy to swallow...
Arthurian stories.
Arthur is a part of it, definitely. That's a big part of classical literature. He went to stories that lie in everyone's hearts because they feel like they already know them. Big, easy to understand themes. Kidnapping, romance, rivalries, and he went back to the stories that just have these simple plot devices that push the stories forward, so that since that aspect of Star Wars, he knew when that aspect already seemed so familiar to us that it would be easy to digest all of these space elements.
Well, it's a lot like when you have a fantasy film and you need really great actors, to pull it off. You have to have the best actors to make something like that.
I think he knew that too, and that's why he cast
Sir Alec Guinness.
And
that's another component. Basic themes, great stories that are time tested, and
the actor that
great
played
actors.
Dracula and Grand whatever, whatever his name is. The actor I'm talking about. Not Christopher Lee, the other actor.
I was going to say Christopher Lee.
The other actor with the sunken facial features who played Dracula in Hammer horror films, and he played the general in Star Wars.
I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember his name. No, again, that's why The Mandalorian's great. The Mandalorian, you can say it went back to those time-tested stories.
Exactly.
It's all focused on the story.
Okay, here's my idea. The Mandalorian, okay, whatever you have to say about the prequels, when Lucas sat down to write them, he did with the prequels what he did with the original trilogy, and that he wrote using as his inspiration things that were interesting to him at that time in his life. He was not preoccupied at all with fan service or even meeting the fans halfway.
Oh, well, can I say something about that?
And he took different inspiration. He obviously the stories are more oriented around the Senate and politics.
What I think happened was he still wanted a story-based film. He wanted to take it back there. But as someone who was more, what do you call, isolated by his fame and fortune, somebody who had no, what is the word I'm looking for?
Feedback?
Not just feedback, but just he was in a bubble. He's very out of touch, and it became what
he wasn't surrounded by people
about.
with the confidence to heat check him on his dumb ideas.
I think that if he's alone all the time and has everything he needs in his compound, and he's, I don't know, reading romance novels and eating TV dinners and
he's reading romance novels.
No, but it seems like he was into that, and all the politics. Maybe he's watching a lot of CNN. That feels very isolated and less like he's out living life.
Well, I didn't mean to say that I thought the prequels were as good as the original trilogy. What I meant to say is that their creation and their inspiration was actually in the spirit of the original trilogy.
Yes, I think they were in the spirit.
The sequel trilogy was not. Okay, Lucas looks for his inspiration for both the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy in classic literature, classic stories, the past, history. What he and the sequel trilogy, headed by J.J. Abrams and Disney, looks to Star Wars for its inspiration. This is a major distinction. It does not look to those stories. It looks to Star Wars itself for its inspiration, which I think is partially to blame for why the product feels so diluted and washed.
Hang on. What I'm trying to say is that I think that when he was younger, he didn't have the luxury of being out of touch, and he had a lot of people around him editing him and checking him. So his ideas were sound, but he does need somebody to say, hey, wait, that's getting too cheesy. Hey, wait, this is going on too long. And there was no one to do that with the prequels. And that's why you ended up with a lot of cheesy romance novel shit and a lot of politics that bored people.
Yes, but my point was that it still feels like Star Wars.
Yes.
It's in the spirit of what Star Wars was.
And I think Rogue One is also in the spirit of Star Wars. It's just
we
more
can talk
like
about
old
Rogue
Star
One,
Wars.
but the sequel trilogy, the Disney Star Wars.
Yes, J.J. Abrams thinks about optics. He thinks about actors.
It feels not like Star Wars.
He thinks about funny moments.
It feels like fan fiction because, like,
No, don't sully fan fiction. It is not fan fiction. Fan fiction is in the vein of old Star Wars.
I think it's more similar to fan fiction.
I don't agree.
Because fan fiction is not all good. It can be mediocre.
No, that's true. But if you talk about good fan fiction, it is all story-driven.
I didn't say good fan fiction. I said fan fiction. I think if you just look at fan fiction...
I think you need to say bad fan fiction.
And if you say fan fiction is anything that it takes a subject or a film or an intellectual property, an IP for which people have nostalgia, and it looks at that. It doesn't look at what inspired that, and it paints with colors from the IP, not from the stories that inspired the IP. So you look at the sequel trilogy, and it's clearly just looking at the original trilogy and getting all of its ideas from the original trilogy, especially the J.J. Abrams ones. It's not looking at the classical mythology that was obviously captivated George Lucas. It's not looking at the old adventure novels like not Logan's Run, Flash Gordon. Things Lucas was into when he was a kid, the influences of which you can see in Star Wars. J.J. Abrams' Star Wars doesn't care about any of that. It's just like okay, what can we take from the original trilogy and how can we move this around to make it feel kind of fresh? It feels washed, diluted, because it doesn't have that base. It doesn't have that spirit. Star Wars was always grounded in the classics, and that isn't there. Which brings me around to The Mandalorian, which to me makes The Mandalorian feel more like in the spirit of classic Star Wars, because it's clearly looking back at the Western. It has this other idea about these. It is inspired by the same broad strokes that inspired George Lucas.
Well, I mean, but that's why I don't think you can just broadly reference fan fiction. You have to say poorly written fan fiction.
Are you like the Kofi Annan for the fan fiction community? Like the
Yes.
United Nations of fan fiction, and you're here on their behalf?
Actually, yes, I feel that way very much.
Do you
so.
actually write fan fiction, or you just read it?
That's no comment, but
Okay.
we will.
So that means that you write exclusively gay / fan fiction, and you don't let anyone know.
Supernatural. Yes.
Ooh.
No, I don't, but that would be funny. But I think that...
So is that what they say? It's not just natural, it's supernatural, bro. Go with it. Wincest.
The thing with what I said before, though, in previous installments of this, whatever we're doing here...
it's nothing so far. We're going to see if it starts to look like something, but so far it's like a shapeless... It's like Slimer coming down the hall at Bill Murray. It's just like this cloud. Like, what is that? It slimed me.
That's what I hope people say. What is that? But
we can only hope it's that interesting.
I think fan fiction really it doesn't have a trailer to recommend it. It doesn't have pictures. It doesn't have great actors or pretty broads. It's not. There are no big names attached.
I'm not sure
to
I was making my point very well, but you get me. When I said the sequel trilogy is just preoccupied with the superficial aspects of the original trilogy.
Yes,
what it looked like, what the ships look like, the costumes. Oh, that's what Star Wars is. It doesn't care about the things George Lucas cared about. It doesn't care about the mythology, the Kurosawa films, the Westerns, everything that inspired Star Wars. It's just looking at Star Wars itself. And that's one of its big mistakes.
Well, I mean, but they would think that wasn't a mistake, because that's basically what you're describing is a Star Wars convention of fans dressed up and taking all the aspects of Star Wars that they love and play acting. And, in that way it did connect with a lot of people. There's a lot of fan service moments.
And that's all shit. And that's
it didn't make a great film.
That's why the prequels, even though they're inferior to the original trilogy, are in the spirit of the original trilogy. Is George Lucas clearly didn't give a shit about. Not only did he not give a shit about the fans' opinions, he didn't give a shit about his children's opinions, his servants' opinions, his producers' opinions. He was absolutely in a vacuum with his own interest, and obviously,
and all of his Hungry Men TV dinners.
Yes, and all of those delicious molten hot lava brownies.
Wait, how do you know it's the brownie? It could be the cherry pie.
All I know is that the brownie comes out. The brownie is the best part about it, and it's but the portion is so unsatisfying. You would have to make 3 of them to get a satisfying portion. It's so sad
he doesn't have anyone to make him Duncan Hines brownies.
Don't you think the Hungry Men TV dinner brownie is superior to Duncan Hines brownies?
No. And I think that if
you're more wrong about that than you are fan fiction. I am here on behalf of the Hungry Man brownie. I will white knight the Hungry Man brownie.
It's not. I mean, the dollar box of Duncan Hines works awesome.
Okay, and it's clear. Okay, and it's clear he wasn't listening to any other voices when he was writing the prequels.
Wait, you didn't even let me make my case, which I have made before. But my case for fan fiction and why it is the good fan fiction. There is literally nothing to recommend it except hit points and the title. And so when people click on that title, it's got to be good. It's got to draw you in immediately. It's got to be based entirely on classic stories.
I've read some of the fan fiction you've given me, and it's quite good.
Yeah, it's...
I'm not saying that it can't be good.
But what I'm saying is that...
I like some of that Mobile Suit Gundam Wing fan fiction.
That was ages ago.
I can't remember any of it, but I do remember I enjoyed reading it.
Okay, but fan fiction, the good fan fiction, has nothing to recommend it. No big names attached to it. No visuals whatsoever. It's just.
I feel like if you write Mobile Suit Gundam Wing fan fiction and it doesn't become gay at some point, you're not being honest about the direction that would actually take.
You are absolutely not going to let me finish.
Okay, go ahead.
But I think since there is nothing to recommend it except that when you click on it, it just it immerses you immediately in a very classic story, a classic adventure. The story has to be good. It's got to be all about the story. And I think what you're talking about that's missing from the J.J. Abrams remakes, or I mean, they might as well be remakes, is that in the originals, it was very much based on stories first. I mean, you had all of these visuals. You had all of these, the pretty girl, the crazy costumes, the lightsabers.
But you had the frame.
Yes, you had just a very classic story that people enjoy. An adventure tale.
Revenge, warring factions, romances, like broad, simple storytelling, narrative building blocks.
I mean, The Princess Bride is sort of a classic
It goes into that in
that.
almost a like a meta kind of way, those storytelling elements. But George Lucas got it, and I think he still had it when he wrote the sequels. But like you said, he was in a bit of a vacuum chamber, and he needed at least a few people to tell him this or that. This or that doesn't work. Yeah. You know, people the Roman Senate proceedings are interesting, but not for like 45 minutes. I mean, and not everyone's into it, George. It's just someone to tell him that.
Yeah.
Just less of that.
And the dialogue with Padme and Anakin.
He needed someone to, say this isn't how people talk to each other.
Sand is coarse and rough.
Yeah.
Not soft like you, Padme. And then he gets rapey. It was weird. It was like somebody who has never been on a date, their idea of romance.
Or someone who hadn't been on a date in a long time and just kind of locked themselves away.
Someone who would describe a phallus as as a steel rod in a velvet sheath.
What?
No, but that's like a classic cheesy romance novel way of describing male anatomy.
Which one?
Any of them.
Anne Rice?
God, probably.
That was meant to be like a dig.
She's not that bad.
No, I read Interview with the Vampire and I enjoyed it.
Yes, it's enjoyable.
And if I had millions of dollars, I would buy her creepy doll mansion in New Orleans. That sounds amazing.
It's you'd Nicolas Cage it up, but
sounds like it comes that way.
But it's
I feel like Nicolas Cage would be like, I've met my maker if you entered that house.
I'm talking about those romance novels that are like a series, A Daddy Doctor for Christmas. Like they try to incorporate all the things that lonely women want.
Okay, well, anyone listening is chewing on that imagery and thinking about that steel rod, thinking about that velvet glove. Do you get me when I say, The Mandalorian does kind of have some of that George Lucas energy where it's looking at classic stories? I don't mean like the energy to put a Hungry Man TV dinner into the microwave. I mean the interest in the classics and classic
that's relative,
storytelling.
Though. I mean, that could take a lot of energy for him.
That's why you delegate if you're a billionaire.
I'm sure Netflix has really affected him.
I don't mean delegate to your employees. I mean delegate to your daughter.
Oh, God.
That might be her official title. The person it's my TV dinners. Is that why he adopted her? Oh, what? God, this just got dark.
That's not a dark life. That's not like Michael Jackson territory. So it sounds like a better deal.
Being adopted to put a rich man's TV dinners into the microwave for him, but you get to live in a mansion and be rich. It's not that bad.
He probably loves her too, so...
I think he loves what she does.
Well,
he loves the way she pushes the button.
Isn't that a lot of parents?
Yeah. You're right, Mariah. There could be a worse lived life than that one.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And do you get to share the TV dinners? I would pick up a box of Duncan Hines brownies.
For someone
it's like 5 minutes
for
to
someone
make.
So desperate to talk about The Mandalorian, you are now avoiding the topic like O.J. Simpson has avoided jail time since murdering those people, allegedly.
I don't want to...
Okay, but just answer this. because you're not answering
Riddle me this.
Riddle me this. I need this answered. I need to have my opinion
You
validated.
need things.
Is the Mandalorian looking at the Western, the spaghetti Western?
That's obvious. I mean, the music alone.
Any fool can see that.
Yes.
Is that like
do
when
really love the
Brahms
music.
when Brahms premiered his first symphony and someone said the last movement it sounds like Beethoven, and Brahms shot back angrily, idiot can see that. Is that what you just did to me?
Yeah, but
Do you think our viewers can go along with that example I just gave?
I would like to think so.
Okay.
I'd like to think I can go along with it. But
So don't you think that's a key to why people are accepting the Mandalorian and rejecting the Rise of Skywalker?
well, let me talk about this. The Mandalorian, what it gets right.
I'll let you.
Will you?
Unless I think of something funny about William Dafoe's dick or something, then I'll just interrupt you.
That ties in with Madonna.
Oh, were they a thing?
Yes. Well, also,
Was she a size queen or something?
but-
Dennis
no,
Rodman,
no.
Willem Dafoe?
probably, but also, they did.
Liam Neeson, did she get with him? I hear he's very gifted.
Okay, let's stop. Anyway, the things the Mandalorian, I think it got right. The music, it is very Western inspired, and it's very 80s. There's sort of a Conan the Barbarian vibe almost. It's very driving. It creates that anxiety, that good anxiety, that anticipation for what's going to happen, and I think that it sounds like they used a lot of natural instruments.
A little Ennio Morricone inspired type
Yes.
elements of the soundtrack.
And it sounds like people playing real instruments, but also they're also using new elements, synthesized instruments. And the combination is very skillfully executed, and I love it. And that's a big part of it, the music. People underestimate the music and how the musical cues have to work. They can't, if they're pushing something that the film hasn't earned, it's just cheesy. The music has to have a very subtle hand. It has to say what you want the film to say.
The music needs to be...
And the film has to live up to that.
The music needs to have an honest partnership with what's actually happening on the screen.
Yes, you said it better than I did.
It can't be out of balance.
But also another thing it gets right, that we talked about a lot. When you do some sort of fantasy film, you have to have great actors, and this does. And I think it has very appropriate actors.
Well, you don't. Have you seen Beastmaster?
That's like a Tron thing. That's what I'm talking about. If you don't want to be
Oh, yeah.
Beastmaster or
Jeff
Tron.
Bridges, that terrible actor. Or Jeff Daniels, or whoever that was.
Anyway, you have to have great actors, and this does. And I like, what is the name of the actress? Do you have your phone? The name
No.
of the actress who plays the female bounty hunter. She's amazing. And I read that she's a MMA fighter. And that they
Ronda
did.
Rousey.
No, that would not work. Maybe it would, but it'd be a very different thing. But this.
Is it China? China's a great actress, Mariah. Have you watched WWE?
Okay, stop.
Very charismatic.
I'm gonna stop
She's
you.
the female Rock.
I'm gonna stop you. But she's.
Wait, she died, didn't she? Am I thinking of the same person?
This just became the China broadcast. For anybody who didn't know that she had passed, and if she hasn't passed and she's watching this, now she knows.
I think any 15-year-old boy living in a trailer park just finally became interested in the discussion. What? Finally, I know some of the things they're talking about now.
He's drinking like a Capri Sun and wearing Ocean Pacific pants from Walmart. Anyway, it's you derail me so often. I forget what I'm talking about. It's the actress that they got to play the female bounty hunter, whose name I don't remember now. It's been a couple weeks since I saw it.
I can't help you.
She was an MMA fighter, and I think she's only been in 2 films before this. And I read that she was the only actress that they had in mind, that they just wanted her, and she's perfect. She is a good actress, and she really feels the part. She feels like somebody who can take somebody down, and that's important, I think, for the role. You can't Denise Richards it up, like in GoldenEye or whatever.
So you don't think Bill Burr could take someone down?
Bill Burr is also awesome, but he brings this sort of skeevy, slimy, mercenary feeling, which is exactly what he is. He doesn't have to take someone down. He has a gun. He's a shortcut man. He's gonna hide behind a corner. He's a gutter snipe. That works. He looks like a gutter snipe. He doesn't look like he's gonna wrestle some dude. He looks like he's gonna shoot you as you're walking out of the door. I
have to remind you that shortcut guy isn't something everyone knows about. That's something we made up.
From Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Okay,
it's
let me
always
explain
the,
it. I will play it. I will
individual.
explain it as quickly as I possibly can. We, growing up, watched a lot of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, stuff like Thundercats. I don't know whether that's actually Hanna-Barbera. Everyone has, but you'll have the main guys, the good guys. You'll have the villains, and the villains will have henchmen, and amongst the henchmen, you'll have different distinct personalities, and there'll always be this personality. A guy who talks like this and doesn't want to work very hard.
He's sort of a stilted pseudo-British accent.
Let me get to the origin of the
upper-class
term.
British accent.
Okay, for example,
Sort of scratchy
the henchmen
voice.
of the villain will have been tasked by the main villain with doing something. They will arrive at, for example, a lake or a river that's very wide. The one that sounds like that with that voice will look at the width of the river and say, I know a different way to go. This is much too difficult to cross. Let's go that way. And therefore, the shortcut guy is born.
Well, no, he always takes the shortcut. He always, and it never works.
Yes.
So
the center.
I still think that's self-explanatory.
The virtue of the shortcut guy, if he has virtue, is that it's survival and that he looks out for himself. He takes the shortcut. If something's too difficult or too dangerous, he won't do it. And
he has no loyalty.
That's what you mean when you say Bill Burr plays a shortcut guy in The Mandalorian.
He plays a henchman type, but maybe a little bit smarter than a henchman. A sniper. That isn't to say that all snipers are like that.
You mean
obviously.
someone smart enough?
I mean somebody like...
smart enough that they know that a sloth is not a monkey. Yes, I was listening to the Bill Burr podcast once, and Bill Burr was recounting a story of traveling to, I think it was Puerto Rico, and he was on a jungle tour, and the tour guide pointed out...
A 3-hour tour.
I don't know how long the tour was.
He doesn't either.
But the tour guide was pointing out various species, in Puerto Rico, and amongst those was this local variety.
Flora and fauna.
Yes, flora, fauna, those words. And there was a sloth. It's like a local Puerto Rican sloth, and the tour guide... In Bill's story, the tour guide made a noise that a prehistoric predator of this sloth that was now extinct would have made, and he was demonstrating that the memory of this predator lived in the sloth.
Resonance.
The resonance. So he'd make the noise, and the sloth would go, oh, and it would crane its neck around looking for the predator.
You don't know that it just wouldn't do that with any noise.
Yes, so I don't think it's sort of like it's not very good example.
There's bad science behind that.
It's a little like what do the cards show me? It's a little Aunt Cleo going on there with the tour guide. But Bill, and then in Bill Burr's immortal words,
you will see what I want you to see.
Which I thought was so funny, that this predator, it was like a prehistoric kind of vulture, would come down from the sky, and in Bill Burr's exact words, rip these fucking monkeys out of the tree. And I thought this was hilarious and told Mariah this story. The first thing Mariah said was, sloths aren't monkeys.
I don't remember what I said, but that's funny. And
it was a sloth, right? It's been so long. Okay.
It was a sloth. Just Bill Burr is a funny guy. I mean, and some of the humor is that you're laughing at him. And that's...
He sounds like a funny
guy.
Boston guy at a bar. At the end of a bar ranting about stuff.
I think it's a case of he's a pretty smart dude who can good observational skills, but he plays up that aspect of himself. This guy who could be...
It's like an urban
in an
quality.
episode of Cheers.
Yeah, it's like he's a guy...
But he's done it so much that it's become part of who he is.
Yeah, it's like a character from the old neighborhood that for most Americans only exist in fiction, so that makes anything he says much funnier.
Yeah.
Sort of like anything, like you just said, anything Cliff Clavin said in Cheers was much funnier because he's this sort of urban character.
But there's no way to know if he's just playing that up or if by this point that's just what he believes. Sauce our monkeys.
Can we talk about Gilbert Gottfried?
No, but we're talking about what the Mandalorian did right.
I mentioned Gilbert Gottfried's name and you went, no.
I'm because I know that's a whole nother can of worms. That's a whole nother can of spumoni.
That doesn't need to be opened ever.
Well, I said that I wanted to talk about the things I think Mandalorian did right. We talked about the music, and I've talked a lot about fan fiction and how, as I keep repeating, there's nothing really to recommend it except that once you begin reading, it jumps right into a very classic story that's enjoyable. And if you
good fan fiction.
And good fan fiction. And then we talk about how that's similar with the original George Lucas Star Wars films, that he stuck to stories that were classic. And that was missing.
And a lot of people pointed out he was being vetted by other people, which he wasn't for the prequels.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, you do need,
he was being filtered by the people around, by very smart people around him.
His wife. I mean, you hear. Maybe it's just gossip.
But I took
care
of that problem. Oh my God, I made it seem like he killed her. No, they just got a divorce.
Well, they got a divorce, and then she just sort of disappeared from the the memory of Star Wars.
I hope she got some of the money. She was definitely a part of, important part of its creation.
Yeah, I'm sure she did, but so Mandalorian, it also does this thing where it doesn't focus so much on, I mean, it's obviously got great costuming, all of that, but it doesn't focus on that as much. It starts with the story, a classic story, and you referenced the Western, and then the music comes into that too. The music is making you have those Western vibes. And it's a classic Western story. It was a great way to go.
By saying, Shannon, that wasn't a brilliant observation. Literally millions of other people have said the exact same thing.
Did I?
And I felt bad.
Why? But
you know what? You're right. I don't feel bad.
The Western is a great choice for a show about a bounty hunter.
And we should give Jon Favreau credit for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a smart choice for a show. It's not just any classic story; it's a classic Western.
Well, for all we know, it wasn't his choice.
I mean, you've got
I mean, there could be a lot of people behind the scenes, so let's just not say anything good about it. It's Favreau.
Well, certain people, you can tell certain people. You see the quality of their projects, and I feel like Favreau, he is pretty good at churning out a nice product.
Who would have guessed that the guy who made...
He makes good choices.
The guy who made Swingers would give better Star Wars than the guy who made Lost.
Well, I could guess that. He had a lot going into that. I mean, I think the story, the Swingers story could have been so shitty. It should have been...
But Mariah, Lost.
Well, Lost is great, but so much went into Lost. I mean, you had so many different writers and so many different...
I'm just saying, the Swingers guy beat the Lost guy at Star Wars.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
But I think that's because it was just him with Swingers. I mean, he was out on a limb and he pulled it off. He was able to edit himself and make it sort of Swingers has sort of a little cute classic story. Mm-hmm. And he knows how to do that small story. And I think that when you're doing an epic film, you really should know how to do a series of small stories. And I think that's what a relationship is like, too. It's a series of small stories. It's nothing in the world is this great sweeping epic that is one thing all the way through. And anybody who approaches an epic film like that is they're going to fail. It's a juvenile idea. It's you've got to focus on those little stories and keep them going and know how to string them together. That's what makes the overall picture.
Even Stallone knew that.
And Stallone's a good writer. I like Stallone. But when you look at the new Star Wars films, the Jedi bullshit, The Last Jedi, the last whatever, it's...
Oh, and by the way, it wasn't The Last Jedi. They lied.
whatever. But you can see that they are just driving toward this epic story, and everything is in service to this epic idea, and there are no little stories within the big story.
Oh, what about when they went to the casino and rode the space llamas?
Oh,
Is that not a beautiful little character-driven anecdote, side story?
I have no idea what they were thinking with that.
The poor homeless children cheered while they rode the space llamas.
I think that's literally the only time.
And then after the triumphant moment where they get away from the guards, the guards just capture the space llamas and take them back.
They didn't make it sort of a little story, though. They made it most of the film. Like, they didn't know how to do little stories, so it just became another film, and everybody was like, where's the rest of the film? We're just watching them release these space rabbits. Like, what film is this? So is this even Star Wars?
They didn't step back and ask...
they don't know how to do it.
What does all of this do? How does this drive the main story forward?
No, they didn't, because it does still have to be in service to the big picture, but you have to know how to tell those little stories.
I feel like
a film is not all the big picture. It's not the ending.
Controversially a bit, I feel like that was a bit in service of the Twitterverse. Like, oh, this is going to be about social justice and slavery and capitalism. And let me just speak for a moment. While it was happening, I realized the points they were making, but they didn't really earn them. It's like, they're making some kind of a comment about rich people, economic...
because if it's forced, just like the music.
Oh, I don't know.
It's a moment they haven't naturally
They haven't earned
to.
it, and I don't know, but I get the idea. Yes, there's economic disparities here. There are poor animals that are in slavery.
You know what it's like?
It's like when you're badly treated and being forced to race, and there are these poor orphan children. It's like all of these notes, and it's like the notes are just cacophonous. They don't make a beautiful symphony.
Well, when you're writing and you've written something that you think is hot shit, but it sort of slows down the story, and there's no point to having it in the middle of, everything that's happening in your story, you have to say, hey, I think that's pretty good and it's what I wanted to say, but it doesn't work in the story, so I need to cut it out. I think when you're forcing things that are things that you want pushed forward, things that you think are really amazing, but they don't really, they slow the story down.
I think they should have done
They're
that.
They're not natural within the story.
But not with that part of the script, with the whole script. Just said, none of this works. Start over.
Again, your main focus needs to be the story. It needs to begin and end with a classic story. And anything that's not in service to that story, that doesn't happen naturally within the story, you got to chuck. And they didn't do any of that. They didn't care about the story at all. They cared about all these little moments they wanted to happen, and all these little messages they wanted to get out, and all these big stars they wanted to push on you with catchphrases.
Can you believe it, right?
It doesn't work.
In hindsight, people are saying who cheered the announcement that George Lucas wouldn't have anything to do with the new trilogy. These same people are saying, well, maybe he should have been on board in a supervisory kind of role. Because, he understood.
Does he even care anymore?
I don't know.
He's just in this bubble of Hungry Man TV dinners and brownies.
All I know is that someone posted on the internet an image of him in a cafeteria in Australia by himself. So in my mind, he's just doing that constantly. He's just traveling the world, eating at cafeterias.
That was several years ago, though. So
he's been at thousands of cafeterias since.
The Neo picture, but
you know how Tom Hanks will upload to his Twitter account pictures of gloves. That's like his thing.
I don't know that. I don't follow the Tom Hanks Twitter account.
It's very unengaging. Like, oh, this is Tom Hanks. This is big Tom Hanks. This is Tom Hanks' big idea of social media. I'm going to take pictures of gloves I see in the middle of the street, and he posts them to. He really does this, and he's done it for years.
You know what it's like? Do you remember those old? There's a website called God, what is it called? Post something. I forgot what it was called, but
Hot or Not.
No, it was a website where they would It's just this. It's this idea that. So I can't remember the reference, so I'm just going to go forward. It's sort of like I want people to think of me as intelligent. You know what it is? It's kind of how Steve Martin is. Steve Martin used to be really funny, and then he got sort of I don't know. It's again, go back to the Richard E. Grant film diaries. If you read
Steve Martin's Twitter, he's still occasionally very funny.
Yes, he's clever. He's a smart guy. But you have to let yourself be clever, and in that vein, you have to be a little on the edge. You have to do things that might look dumb.
Okay, I don't know.
And I don't think he can do that anymore, and that's what I'm saying about this. I think Tom Hanks, for a long time, has not wanted to look dumb.
I don't know who's bashing who. You're going to have to untangle this. So is Steve Martin...
I'm saying Steve Martin is clever, but to be really, truly funny and not cringy, you have to let yourself look dumb sometimes. And I think he's at a place in his life where he can't.
Oh, his public
persona. He has to be respected.
His public persona needs to be really immaculately curated now.
Yes. I hate that, and that's the best way to say it. Immaculately curated. And
But
Tom Hanks, I feel like his whole life he's a great actor, but
Hanks
forever his
letting his
public
pants
life
down with
has
all
been...
of these gloves, Mariah. He'll post any glove on his Twitter. There's no curation.
But that's also
happening
there's
here.
also a dad joke.
And you can
vibe
clearly
to
tell
it.
he runs his own Twitter account, because if he had a social media manager, they would not let that shit
No,
up
but
on his Twitter.
wait. But there's also a dad joke vibe to it. I want to be respectable, but I'm also doing something a little funny.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not really funny, and it's not really respectable.
And I don't know Jeffrey Epstein. Well, what were you saying about The Mandalorian?
What was I saying about The Mandalorian? What can I say?
Okay. I want to make if
have something I want to put on the table.
If you've said everything you wanted to say about The Mandalorian.
No. Solo story. Okay, I've heard some people talking about this, and
that's
when I
like
saw
putting your boots on the table. That's rude as hell.
with mud and crap, horse shit all over them. Okay, but so there. What I've heard some gossip online on Reddit, and when I first, the episodes Beyond What You've Seen, the first one Beyond What You've Seen is directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and when I saw her name attached, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then you go online, and it recalled to me that her father also did rescued a Star Wars film, but I mean, a lot of people would say he didn't rescue it at all. I mean,
he took it and ran into the forest.
Yes.
The girl still died in the barn.
Yes. No, more like there were horses in the barn, and the barn was on fire, and they said, we can't get it open with this crowbar. Do you have a sledgehammer? He's like, I've got a sledgehammer, but how much do you want to pay me for it? You know, and they're like, okay, we'll let your daughter have this other house, this other burning barn. And except that barn's not burning.
Oh, so
That's
you're
a bad
making
reference.
like a nepotism.
No,
kind of
I'm
point.
not. The internet is. But
just own up to it. You believe it.
The barn still burned in his case with Solo Story
These
because he
ginger
could
horses?
not. His mallet didn't work. If they were, I think he would have tried a lot harder.
So is that how Bill Burr got into The Mandalorian, like ginger networking?
No, they've got a lot of interesting people in The Mandalorian. What's her name? Strangers with Candy. God, I hate not remembering people. Amy Sedaris. Amy Sedaris is in it, and she's amazing. So good and so perfect. She plays a mechanic.
Out of all of the people who appeared in Lady in the Water, Bryce Dallas Howard isn't the one that I would have given the reins to The Mandalorian.
But Bryce Dallas Howard is the one who did have the connections.
So what about
to push her name forward?
What about Paul Giamatti?
Paul Giamatti will have more success, maybe getting somebody to apply his name to some wine.
Do you notice how he's kind of disappeared?
Yes.
Like around the time he came out in Sideways, he was everywhere. He was in John Adams.
He's a really great actor. So wonderful.
Oh, yes.
But again, he's an actor's actor. He will come on and just, he can be the part. And I think he has a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight.
So
maybe
if
he
someone
just
said,
doesn't want to direct.
we
Maybe
need
he's
you
done
to star
with it.
in the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar biopic, you could just come on the set and be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You'd watch that?
I would watch that. I don't think it would work, but I would watch that because it won't work.
But people have been critical.
But it won't work in a brilliant way.
I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it work or not work. I don't want to see the best Kareem Abdul-Jabbar biopic in existence. I don't want to see it.
I kind of do.
I'll just watch that footage of him sitting in a lawn chair with sunglasses while Bruce Lee is in front of him from, I think, Game of Death. And then he stands up and he's huge.
Okay.
It's very creepy. Okay, we were talking about The Mandalorian. You clearly don't want to think about that.
No, it's not that I don't want to think about it. It's that I do think he'd be interesting to watch, but I don't want to
Would he know you're watching him? Do you mean like outside his window with binoculars?
This is why drones are getting these rules slapped on them. I immediately thought the moment I saw drones, people are going to be looking in people's windows.
I think people of that height tend to have back problems and problems with their bones later in life. If he saw you outside the window with binoculars, he'd get up and run and hurt himself. And he's an elderly, he's a very tall elderly man.
There's like a Dolly Parton boob thing going on. Like they're
or Salil Moonfry or whoever you like.
I don't know. Okay.
Okay, but people have been
people have been concerned because there's a Solo story, Ron Howard connection that maybe he made some deal. I'll rescue this film or try to. If you have something for my daughter,
they have been concerned that
she wants to be a director.
That a backroom deal occurred that involves nepotism. Well, I will just tell them it did happen, and it happens every day, and you have to live with it in every single industry.
I mean, I don't think it's even a question. You see it. That's what happened. It's obvious. Did she do a good job? Yeah. I mean, would I like to see a Paul Giamatti
I heard someone say that television directing was
yes.
kind of a joke. That at that point,
not anymore.
That that it kind of directs itself. And that a TV directors usually don't have that much say. That's how actors who appear on the show can step into the director's chair so easily. It's not that big of a deal.
I don't know. I think that
like
it's
Tony
changing.
Tony Danza directed an episode of Who's the Boss.
But
it's like, oh my God, I'm so impressed.
You're talking about
and you learn the truth, and you're even less impressed by Tony Danza than you knew you could be.
Okay, but Who's the Boss is a bad comparison. It's just
Alyssa Milano could have directed Who's the Boss.
Yeah, it's got a very tight formula.
Danny Pintaro could have directed Who's the Boss.
No, but you can't connect it to television now. Television now is more like mini films. I think there's so much more artistic freedom.
I think I'm speaking out of school. You might be have more up-to-date knowledge on this than I do.
No, you have the same knowledge. You're just talking about something that doesn't connect.
Or I just want an excuse to talk about Tony Danza. I want to talk about nostalgia because people... adjacent to Star Wars is always the charge that we are living in the age of nostalgia, and you have all of these projects being resurrected where the idea is, we're going to capitalize on people's nostalgia for these old properties, and that's what this whole Star Wars business is about.
Well, also because there's so much choice out there, and copyright issues, it's just easier to go back to something that is tried and tested, and there's no issue connected with it. The
Mandalorian, even with all it does right, the nostalgia is there. I mean, how can you...
But you could say that it got the nostalgia right. It deserves the nostalgia. The Baby Yoda
is a nostalgia bomb. I mean, it's
but they did it well. If you do it well, it doesn't matter.
When it comes on screen, it's like screaming, remember this?
Yeah, but it's okay because it works within the story.
So nostalgia can be done well.
Anything can be done well if it serves the story.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm saying nostalgia can be done well and it can be done poorly. Like Stranger Things, would you say the first season of Stranger Things is decent nostalgia?
I don't know. I'm really on the fence about it.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
If you remember, J.J. Abrams himself, a few years prior to Stranger Things, directed a film called Super 8, which was kind of like the concept car, and Stranger Things was the production model. There's some links between those two.
And I think that's okay.
So if they were going to reboot Star Wars, they got someone who was well versed in nostalgia.
But the point is, you can do whatever you want as long as it serves the story.
Anyone can do whatever they want.
If you're thinking of the story
as long
first,
as they don't hurt anyone.
Thank you, Tom York. But if it serves the story, if you're thinking of the story first and foremost, then whatever you do is okay. But if you're not thinking of the story and you're just trying to shove something in, shoehorn it, Alan Rickman style, if you will, you're going to fail. And if all you're thinking about is nostalgia and you're not thinking about the story, and then nostalgia sort of works in this story, it's... the idea of a bounty hunter having to rescue a child and the unlikely pairing, it's very classic, it's very simple, it's clean. And then that child just happens to be Yoda. I mean, not Yoda, but it's Yoda.
And the film is screaming, remember this, and we say all together, yes, we remember that.
But you only get the callback if, the clap back or whatever, if you did it well. if it worked in the story and people are actually watching up to that point. I mean, it's cringy otherwise. You have to earn it. But anyway, another person whose name was attached to directing, they had some interesting directors. What was his name? Taika Waititi. He's I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. He did Thor Ragnarok, which I really loved.
I think he has some interesting ideas of his own, and is probably better served by directing his own scripts.
He's someone, I think, who gets the little stories within the big story and how they connect.
But I think he's
those moments. He's very good at it.
I think he has his own stories, and he should direct original screenplays that he wrote. He's demonstrated that he should be doing that.
Well, I'm sure he's listening to this and he's taking notes, but
I hope so.
But The Mandalorian's a great thing. I mean, you got to break out and do other things. You got to, refresh yourself, get outside the bubble.
Would you rather
Star Wars?
Would you rather he directed a season of The Mandalorian, or for Jojo Rabbit to exist?
I haven't seen Jojo Rabbit.
Well, it's an original screenplay by Taika Waititi.
I know that, but I haven't seen it.
And if he were just consumed by the process of making one of these big, lavish productions, he might not have had time to do that.
But it's not either or.
So I'm saying I want these auteurs to make original films, because I think we're sorely missing really well-made original films with budgets.
But you have to do different things to keep yourself fresh.
You don't.
Yes, you do.
Wes Anderson has been doing the same thing over and over again in every film.
And they're really great films, but how do you know that he's not doing different things? How do you know he's not, sneaking around, getting into other shit?
Well, maybe he is. Do you think, or do you mean maybe he's been like James Cameron's, first mate on all of those voyages to the bottom of the ocean? Maybe that's where he got the idea for The Life Aquatic. That was like the original Avatar.
That's not something I think they could have kept quiet, though. But maybe they're pen pals.
Well, so Wes Anderson, as far as I can tell, is very soft-spoken, so I think you could easily keep him quiet.
I don't know if it was the real account. I think it was on Twitter a long time ago. I think on New Year's Eve we had some back and forth about something, and he played around. It was like some joke about ejaculate, but and Gallagher. But it was really great. And if that was the real him, I think he has a good sense of humor, and I think he's not afraid to get outside the box.
Congratulations, Mario. You once met the man who met Andy Griffith.
I didn't meet him. I'm just saying somebody on Twitter, and if that was him, he's I think, but I'd like to think Wes Anderson could do things like that. Just joke around with people.
Sounds like he was very, very close to making some very problematic tweets in the mode of James Gunn. He just barely missed that.
Well, maybe he didn't miss it at all, and people just don't care that much. I mean, James Gunn is doing
To be honest,
Disney
they
films.
shouldn't have cared about James Gunn's tweets, because they were not that bad.
It
was cringy, like puerile adult humor, but that's his brand.
Well, as who pointed this out? Was it PewDiePie or I'm trying to remember who pointed this out? That you have, I think it was Felix. You have to think about the time. Twitter. You're not seeing the entire exchange on Twitter. I mean, these are usually back and forths with people, so it's you don't know the context of the joke, so it's just it's a one-liner with no context, and also you don't know what was popular at that time, what the jokes were at that time. I mean, you don't know how bad it actually was. Okay, that's all I had to say about that, in a Forrest Gump sort of way. That's my box of chocolates.
So if Tom Hanks had a box, it'd be filled with gloves he found?
No, he does have a box called Twitter, and it's filled with gloves, and it's going to be horribly damning taken out of context. We have found the glove. It's going to be an OJ situation. He's going to find the wrong glove one day, and it's going to be oh so innocent, but it's going to bring him down. I don't want to put that on him.
Some
He's a
people
lovely
think
man.
that they bring up his film, The Man with One Red Shoe, and gloves, and they say there's some sort of Illuminati thing happening here, and they say, he's friends with the Clintons, and they try to tie the whole thing in. Like he's having a laugh at the masses by showing all these gloves. He's revealing some sinister part of his exclusionary sort of lifestyle.
Like he's in the Coconut Grove or whatever the fuck it's called.
Yes, but I don't think it's that interesting. I don't think that's I think Tom Hanks is just kind of a boring person.
He's not feeding babies to who's it?
Moloch, the owl. Yeah. No, I think I just don't think he's that interesting. He really is just sort of a boring dad type taking pictures of gloves. And he thinks that's funny.
It feels like the combination, the collision of a dad joke and I want to be seen as respectable.
Yes, I don't think
some sort of idea of high art.
The evidence is not strong that these are the gloves of his child victims.
You might as well, but I'm saying he might as well be arranging little, little bits of foam, culinary foam with 1p.
Mm-hmm.
And taking picture after picture of it. I mean, it's that, but then it's also kind of like dad jokey.
Mm-hmm. Did he know Jeffrey Epstein?